Hello everybody, welcome to this week's lecture on strategic leadership as part of MAN301 strategic management. As you're all aware, there was an issue with the rendering of the pre-recorded slides, so I've had to do these again in a little bit of a rush. And so hopefully there won't be too many ums and ahs in it because I won't have had time to re-edit things to make it a little bit clearer in that way. So what are we doing today in this lecture? Well, we're going to divide it into several parts like we normally do. There are some supporting videos that explain particular aspects of leadership. I've drawn from the strategic leadership military style strategic leadership because that's the original basis of strategic leadership, but then we've gone on to leadership within business. That's why we've got the David Petraeus video outlining leadership and strategy. But there are some other supporting videos there that talk about the role of strategic leadership and provide explanations of how they apply in organizations. So some mini case explanations. What we're also going to do this week is discuss things related to the difference between strategic leadership and leadership. Well, how much time are we going to spend on that? I'm going to make the assumption that you've covered leadership in at least one other topic in this course, one other unit in this course. You've probably done it in management. You may have done it in organizational behavior. You may have done it in one of the other applied subjects. Definitely would have talked about it a little bit in HR. We're not talking about leadership from that lower perspective. Lower perspective from a psychosocial perspective, I suppose. What we are doing is talking about leadership and how it contributes to management performance. So one of the things that we'll be talking about is strategic leadership actions and the factors affecting managerial discretion. They're a little bit different, I think, than the type of things that are normally covered in first semester for first year management topics, because we're focusing on strategy rather than just on interaction. So over the next couple of hours, including the coverage in the supporting videos, we're going to define strategic leadership and describe the importance of top-level managers. We're going to discuss the roles of top-level managers and the influence what influences management discretion. Management discretion is the ability to make decisions, and the ability to make decisions and the likelihood those decisions are made. And we're going to discuss strategic leadership actions. So there are three components to this lecture. Any of those three components would make a good examination question. So firstly, define strategic leadership and describe its importance to the organization, the importance of top-level managers to the organization. So strategic leadership is the ability to anticipate, to envision, so look forward, to maintain flexibility, and to empower others to create strategic change as necessary. The core of strategic leadership is the ability to manage the firm's operations effectively and sustain high performance over time. Notice that's where it links back directly to strategic and the concepts we've had about strategic sustainable performance over time. Strategic leadership is multifunctional, it's complex, it requires an understanding of how human behavior works, but it is more than that because it is the type of behavior people at the top level of the organization make that impact on the way the organization as a whole operates. Now, we all make decisions and we all lead groups in one way or another. We're all part of groups. It's more than that. It's about leading aspects of the organization, making decisions about how we allocate resources and how those resources are allocated to achieve our goals. We're making decisions that are often not programmed. They're unique decisions. They're based on the type of things we talked about, environmental scanning, into the internal environment resources and capabilities, the competitive dynamics we're operating in, how we align those things against our strategy and how we implement those strategies, how we structure the organization, how we have lines of authority within the organization. So that's why it's multifunctional, complex, and requires an understanding of human behavior. So strategic leaderships need to be Strategic leaders need to be willing to make candid, courageous and pragmatic decisions and to seek corrective feedback from others. So they can't make those decisions in isolation. They have to approach their stakeholders. They have to have an idea of their stakeholders' goals, their stakeholders' needs, and how those stakeholders impact on them. They have to know things about their competitors. They have to be willing to receive information to enable them to make a decision and to be open to decisions, open to information from others, but they still have to make the decisions. Managers must be willing to challenge and, where necessary, change their mindset to enable them to respond to different conditions in the external environment, in the industry environment, in the internal environment, the competitive dynamics, attack and response that are occurring. Top-level managers... before I do top-level managers, let me just say two things about style. Strategic leadership should be transformational because we've talked about how strategy is about vision and formulation of how to achieve a vision and how to make followers continuously strive to higher levels of achievement. And also they need to have high levels of emotional intelligence because that type of decision-making process requires engaging and understanding others as well as yourself to be able to effectively make a set of strategic decisions that will be sustainable over time, but also be aware of that and be able to change direction, challenge your own mindset when circumstances change. So, and the final thing I might want to mention about emotional intelligence is emotional intelligence is part of dealing with uncertainty. People with high emotional intelligence tend to have a higher ability to deal with uncertainty. And because they have that higher ability to deal with uncertainty, that higher ability to deal with uncertainty flows into strategic decision-making, because strategic decision-making is always made in an environment of uncertainty, because you're making decisions about things to do that may have not been done before. Top-level managers often use their discretion, their latitude for action, when making strategic decisions, including those concerns with the effective implementation of strategies. So, top-level executives, top-level managers need to be action-oriented. Their decisions should spur the company to action. And the primary factors affecting those decisions, the things that enable or act as a barrier to managers, top-level managers making decisions, or are things that limit their managerial discretion. There are external environmental sources that create factors that limit the manager's ability to make decisions. There are characteristics of the organisation that limit the manager's ability to make decisions. And there's characteristics of the manager themselves and how that limits their ability to make decisions. So let's look at top-level managers and the influences on top-level managers. The influences on those three factors on managerial discretion. Now, this is a little bit weird, this section, because this section has a very small set of slides. In fact, it's only really one slide long, but there's so much information on this one slide. And that's why we've asked you questions about this in the tutorial. Because this slide outlines the characteristics of the organisation, the characteristics of the manager, and the characteristics of the external environment that influence managerial discretion. So, the industry structure. If you're the dominant firm in the industry, or if the industry has that gives you the ability to make a decision that influences the rest of the organisation. If the industry is highly competitive, it changes your level of discretion. If the industry is slow moving or fast moving, it changes the nature of the industry, so it changes your scope to make decisions. If the industry is highly regulated, it changes the scope. If the industry is growing rapidly, well, you have more opportunities to seek. If it's in decline, it limits the amount of decisions you make. The number and type of competitors, I've mentioned that. More competitors, more likelihood of attack and response. You go back to the competitive dynamics model. The nature and degree of political and legal constraints, whether or not you can expand, whether there's licensing required, whether there's financing required, whether you're an organisation that has a bottleneck or it's dependent on approval, whether there are formal processes that are required, or whether you're the type of industry that has lots of flexibility because you're under the radar. The difference between, say, being a real estate agent and being a financial advisor. Different industries, different constraints. And finally, the degree that which products can be differentiated. If the products can be highly differentiated, that gives you a lot of ability to make decisions to take yourself in a different direction than if it's a commodities orientated or a cost dependent structure. The size of the organisation. Larger organisations may have more scope because they have more resources, but they may have more bureaucracy because of their size. The age of the organisation. The earlier organisations may have, as they grow, they may have less. Managers may have less decision-making ability because the top manager, is the owner, and they make all the decisions, or they may have much more scope to make decisions because there's no bureaucracy set in place. The organisational culture, whether it's a mechanistic or an organic organisation, whether it supports risk or is risk averse. The availability of resources, which can be affected by size. But if you may have, we talked about viability and feasibility of actions. Well, if you don't have you might have a great idea, you might have a fantastic direction, you might have the ability to produce the most differentiated product, but you don't have because you own that patent, but you don't have the resources to be able to do it. Or you don't have access to the right input resources. And the patterns of interaction amongst employees. And finally, the characteristics of the manager themselves. Strategic decisions are always about ambiguity. So a manager with low tolerance for ambiguity, well, that's a factor that affects their ability to have managerial discretion. The commitment to the firm and its desired outcomes influences whether or not the manager will or won't make decisions. Their interpersonal skills, because when you make a decision, you also have to sell a decision to others. But you also want your interpersonal skills can work the other way too, is that you may want to be gaining information from others so that you can make a better decision. What level you aspire to. Some firms, some managers have aspirations to rise in the organisation, to take risks and grow. Others don't. And there's a whole range of other personal characteristics that sit there. And finally, your degree of self-confidence. So that's the end of the first section of what I want to cover. The introduction and objective 1 and 2. In a moment, we're going to discuss the key leadership actions and how that relates to organisational performance and strategic management.